Good evening. This is John Milburn for Laws 11059, Statutory Interpretation. This is week 1 of Term 3, 2017. We have a number of students online. Thank you very much for attending. I appreciate it when you can attend, and I encourage you to continue to do so throughout this term, this unit. I also encourage you to ask any questions through UCrew. Those of you who have found your way through to UCrew, I thank you. I see there's been some good comments on there already. Those of you not familiar with UCrew, it's the platform that I prefer to use for interactions on a daily basis. It's not just for me to provide you with information. It's an opportunity for you to ask questions, which you can do through UCrew, or, and I encourage you to do this, upload your own material. So if you come across some content, a paper, a video, an observation, a reflection, or something that you think is important to share, please do so. And I encourage you to do that through UCrew. Of course, you can also do that through the Zoom sessions that we'll have each week. So by way of brief background, I have been working for the university for a number of years now, 6 years, and I've been unit coordinator for this subject in the past. And I'm unit coordinator for a number of subjects, regularly for Introduction to Law, Statutory Interpretation, Environmental Law, ADR, and from time to time, Trusts, Evidence and Proof, Law and the Environment, a few others. You might see me pop up at various stages in different scenarios. We will have a look at the Moodle site tonight. The few things that I want to draw to your attention, and the one of those is UCrew. Now, the focus of this course is pretty much always, when I teach a course, is for those that wish to practice in law. I know that many of you won't practice as solicitors or barristers. However, in doing a LLB subject, such as statutory interpretation, I expect that you will be in a position to practice or instruct people that are practicing in law. So that's the focus of the course. So with that in mind, let's get into a little scenario. Pretend for a moment that you're in a law firm, your first client walks in, and your client, who's a lovely lady, complains to you about an injustice and says, "I've been banned from selling my product," she says. "I received notice to stop doing so with an extract of some legislation. Section 68, and she produces you this extract, and it just says Section 68, it's hypothetical of course, "A person may only sell Australian-made items." And she says, "What do I do? How do I deal with this issue?" So armed with that piece of legislation, a person may only sell Australian-made items, and the notice that she must stop selling the items that she's selling, I'm going to ask you to think about what sort of questions you might ask the client relevant to statutory interpretation. So let's deal firstly with the factual issues. You can use the chat facility, you can unmute your microphone. A person may only sell Australian-made items. What do we ask? Yep.
What's the statute first? Like what
Very
legislation?
good point. That's a very good point. Exactly. What exact statute are we talking about? All right, we identify it. It's the Australian-Made Items Only Act of 2017. Hypothetical, of course. All right, so Section 68 says a person may only sell Australian-made items. What else do we ask the client? What do we need to know?
Where are they made?
What's she selling?
Okay, so where are they made? Okay, so that's a good point. What was that, Sarah? Thank you, Michael.
What's she selling? Because if it's something that's put together in Australia but the parts are from overseas, it's going to be something different than, like, I don't know, if it's a fruit or something.
Okay, so she's selling a scarf is the item.
Okay.
What else? So where is she selling? That's a good point. Maybe she's selling things in England and the statute is an English statute. It's not in this scenario, but these are good points. Any other questions that immediately come to your mind? A person may only sell Australian-made items. The fact that I put emphasis on almost every word in that sentence gives you a hint.
Definitions.
What was that, sorry, Tanya?
Is she acting as a person or under a corporation?
Yes, very good. So we have to ask, is it a person or a corporation? She says, oh, it's a company. I set up my own company for this purpose. Now, did somebody else come in?
That was me. I was just asking basically the same question.
Same thing, sole trader or company. And I think Deb asked the same question as well. Who told her that she couldn't sell them? That's a good point. Does the person have authority to do it? Oh, it was some inspector came round to the stall where I sell my scarves and told me that I'm not allowed to sell them and gave me this piece of paper. All right. So we've identified did she sign an agreement, if it was in a marketplace, etc. So every word potentially means something, doesn't it? Does that mean singular, or what if there are two people? Person, does it mean person? Does it mean company? May only sell. What if she says, well, I actually don't sell the scarf, but what I do is every person that buys a shirt or a blouse from me, I give them a scarf for free. That's part of the deal. So what do we mean by sell? What do we mean by Australian made? Some ideas were floating around. Well, what if part of it was made in Australia? What if the materials are sourced in Australia? So there are definitional issues in relation to what we mean by Australian made. And items, what's an item? This is a scarf that we're talking about. So in response to some of the questions that you might ask, your client may say, well, the item is actually made overseas, but I ensure that it's based on an Australian design, it's 100% Australian materials, and I insist that every person who works in the company is an expat Australian citizen. Does that make it Australian made?
No.
No, we say? All right, well, let's take the reverse of that. It's made in Australia, but I'm very clever because I source, it's a shonky company. They're on Australian soil, but they only use people from overseas that are illegal immigrants. They pay them base wages, and it's based on an overseas design using overseas material and technology. Does that make it Australian made?
Wow. Yes.
Okay, so what we're saying then is, according to Michael, the definition of Australian made is the geography. And that may well be the case. There's obviously no answer to this question. I'm just posing it as something to get you interested in the thought of thinking about the sentence, thinking about each word within the sentence, and what do we need to think about from a statutory interpretation perspective beyond that?
Doesn't it come under the fact that, I'll get there, this scarf, it's getting sold or it's getting handed out, but is this the part of a marketing position of the sale? Because there's that court case, which was AMCO, which was selling items when they were with petrol to give out an item, and they got refused to sell it and to pass it on because it was an enticement of sale.
Sure. That's right. So that means that we're looking at that question of sell. Is this actually to sell something? So that's good. But in a more broad, general sense, just for the moment, we know that we need to look at the sentence. We know we need to look at each word within that sentence. Do we go beyond that? Now, Nicole says we look at the context. So what's the context of what, Nicole? The whole legislation. Thank you. And Tanya says the purpose of the legislation. Okay, so already we've identified two really important words in statutory interpretation: purpose and context. So please remember those words. In fact, I'd urge you to keep your own personal dictionary of key words in statutory interpretation and make a note of where you source your information, because in the exam question, if I ask you a question about purpose or context or both, it might be a very general question, and you might need to provide multiple sources to support your argument. Okay, so purpose of legislation is important. Context of the legislation is important. Nicole says we look at the whole legislation. I agree with all of those things. That's really important. Now, when we look at the whole of the legislation, can we identify particular parts of the legislation that may have a bearing on the issue of statutory interpretation?
Interpretation versus construction.
Yes, interpretation versus construction. Yep. What about the layout of legislation? Have you noticed anything about the way in which the pieces of legislation are typically laid out now? We have section numbers, we know that. Have you noticed anything else? Does it just start at 1 and finish at 99? Or are there breaks?
It starts
Heading.
off.
Yep. Yeah, sorry, David.
It starts off with introductions and it moves through preliminary objects objects of the Act and preliminary sections as well, with all the sections underneath those. Sorry, should I say chapters with the sections underneath that?
Yeah, sure. Yep. So chapters, parts, divisions, and you said a key word then, objects. So objects is a key word in statutory interpretation. When you're thinking about legislation, where would you typically find an objects clause?
At the beginning of the Act itself.
Yeah.
Or near the beginning.
Yeah. If I was to place a bet, I'd say most objects clauses would be clause 3 of legislation. What's the significance of headings? Sharon said headings. Nicole said headings. Why would that be potentially relevant, particularly in the context of Section 68? Nicole said at the beginning, if the clause is under a heading for food, it isn't about a scarf. Very good. I like that. Subsections act in relation to particular areas, says Nicole and Sarah respectively for those two comments. I like that. So we've talked about context, haven't we? And if we just simply read Section 68 and we don't put it in context, then we might make a terrible mistake. As Nicole said, if that clause, a person may only sell Australian-made items, is under a heading that relates to food sales, well, you know, maybe the regulator who took objection to the selling of scarves based on that section is not acting appropriately. Maybe you can attack that complaint. So subsections are relevant in relation to an area of definitions may provide further insight, says Sarah. So definition sections are important as well. So it may be that in a particular chapter of a piece of legislation, the first section within that chapter may say, or of a division, for example, may say, this section applies for the sections within this division, and it might have its own definition section. So when you're thinking about a definitions section of a piece of legislation, it may be that it is incorporated in a particular section, typically at the start, or it more likely is in a schedule at the end, referred to in a section at the start, refer to Schedule 1 of the Act for definitions, or it might be that particular divisions or chapters or parts of the legislation have their own interpretation provisions that relate to that chapter or division or part. So suddenly it becomes a bit scary and a bit confusing, doesn't it? In that if you're required to give definitive advice to someone in relation to what they would say it's a pretty simple legal question, can I or cannot sell this item, in your mind, without necessarily explaining this to the client, you're thinking purpose, context, object, headings, subheadings, definitions, and all of this is flowing through your mind before you can give that simple answer. If you start talking to clients about these sorts of concepts, their eyes will glaze over. They'll look at their watch because they think you're charging by hourly rates and giving them a lecture, and they're just not interested. What they're interested in is, can I sell it or do I have to stop? Do you understand? So this is the sort of thing that you need to consider when you're considering a legal question generally. Now, of course, we're talking about legislation. given the subject is statutory interpretation, that's not surprising. But to complete the task, you also need to consider case law. And of course, case law does have a bearing on statutory interpretation. Okay, so we're starting to get an idea of some of the words, some of the thinking behind statutory interpretation. There's a quote that I'd like to read to you. It's drawn from this book. It's not your prescribed text, but it's really good. This one here, which is Statutory Interpretation in Australia by Pearson Geddes. This is the 8th edition by LexisNexis. The paragraph, the quote that I'm going to tell you is from paragraph 2.6 of the text. It's on page 39. And it's a quote by Justice Spiegelman of the Supreme Court of New South Wales, the Chief Justice. And the quote is this: "Law is a fashion industry," which is opposite. We've been talking about scarves and fashion. "Over the last 2 or 3 decades, the fashion in interpretation has changed from textualism to contextualism. Literal interpretation, a focus on the ordinary meaning of the particular words, is no longer in vogue. Purposive interpretation is what we do now. In constitutional, statutory and contractual interpretation, there does appear to have been a shift from text to context." So another couple of words for you to consider and start building your own definition section. Text and context. We've talked about that a bit tonight. There's been some talk about context. There's been talk about the text. So I guess an easy mistake for someone to make is to read the text. Don't think about the context. Don't think about the purpose or the object or the purpose behind the legislation and make a call. You must consider the entire context of the legislation, and the other word to consider is purposive. So purposive interpretation is what we do now. Okay, so that's the quote for tonight. It's good because it does give a clear indication of where we're going with this subject. Can anyone tell me what would be a contrast as a statutory interpretation technique to the purposive approach?
Literal approach.
Very good. That's one
or
of them.
Possibly the golden rule or the mischief rule.
That's it. Bang, bang, bang. Done it. All 4. That's it. So of those, 3 we don't worry about too much now. Number 4, the purposive approach, is what we consider. When I was in law school in the late 70s at University of Queensland, they didn't teach the purposive approach. In fact, statutory interpretation wasn't a subject. It was part of introduction to law. We touched on it for a couple of weeks, but it certainly wasn't a standalone subject. And back then, we would learn the literal rule, we'd learn the mischief rule, we'd learn the golden rule. Be aware of those rules. I really don't want to teach you those things because that will just cloud your thinking a bit. But be aware of it, and I think in your textbook, Michelle Sanson talks about them, but in a late chapter, which is very good. So think...
They're covered briefly in chapter 1.
Oh, she does? Okay. So thank you for that, Sarah. So just be aware of those things. You may be able to argue a case based on the literal rule, the mischief rule, or the golden rule, but mostly what we're looking at now is the purposive approach. And that's reflected in the statement by Justice Spiegelman. Okay. So let's now look at Moodle, because those of you who have worked with me in the past, you know that I like to encourage you to think backwards. Look at what we want to achieve and then consider how we're going to get there and map out a plan to do so. I've got 3 screens operating at the moment. I'm going to attempt to share the screen, which means that there's a fair chance that I'll find the wrong one. With any luck, you can now see my Moodle page. Is that right? If I can just give me a nod.
Yep.
Can you see Moodle? Great, thank you. All right, so pretty standard layout. If you've worked with me in the past, you'll have a good idea of what it's all about. So my comments are mostly for those people that I haven't worked with in the past. I have a fixed, this is what I call my landing page in Moodle. And there's a few paragraphs at the start, the link to tonight's tutorial, encouragement to go on uCrew, and just a little bit about my background. Now below that, we have the latest information. There's really nothing in there at the moment. It just says, welcome to Laws 11059. But each week, when I record this session, I will upload for that week only a copy of the link to the video here under latest information. Not sure if you can see my cursor moving, but it'll be under that heading of latest information. But the only video that I'll include there is likely to be the current week's video. I will also save the video for the week under the weekly sessions. So here in week 1, at the moment, there are some lectures, but not this week's tutorial / lecture, but that's where I'll save it. So each week under lectures, you'll see week 1, week 2, week 3 progressively. So for the first week, I'll probably send you a link for this tutorial. So those that are watching later after the event, just be aware that you won't receive that link by special email. You'll need to go and find it. Under the heading of latest information, we have the link to uCrew. Now, there's been, I'll just explain. I like to set up my courses well in advance, and when I set up the uCrew links, probably a month, 6 weeks ago, everything was working fine. Then about 2 weeks ago, I got a note from the university administration saying, we're changing all the links to uCrew. So when you set up your course, make sure you have the new links. Well, I've already done it. So, but there were some problems with that. So if you're having difficulty, if you're watching this video later, if you're having difficulty getting through to uCrew, I'm going to be looking at these links to make sure they're working. But has anyone who's joined us live had any difficulty getting through on uCrew?
I still can't get onto it.
Michael, you still can't. Okay. Look, we'll keep in touch. I mean, we'll get to the bottom of it. Anyone else having problems? Deb's getting access denied. Stella's getting access denied. All right. Look, it may be, and I think this is the heart of it, I think those that have already worked with uCrew in the past are fine. This is what I'm guessing. Those that have not worked in uCrew are having some access problems. So tonight, tomorrow, I'm going to play around with the settings, rejiggle in accordance with the instructions I've got, and hopefully those that haven't been able to get through will be able to. But please keep in touch. Those that can get through, if you suddenly can't, let me know and I'll work through it. IT will probably not be able to help you so much because it seems to be a standalone sort of area, but we'll try. And I'm working with the people at uCrew on that point. So
can I just,
patience? Yes.
Can I just, last semester I had difficulties getting through to uCrew depending on which way I went to access it. So if I went from the home page, it was fine. Yep. If I went from the Moodle site, it was very temperamental. It also depended on whether I was accessing it from work or whether I was accessing it from home as well. So there is various ways. I actually rang up IT, CQU IT, and they said that sometimes there can be an issue if you're accessing it from workplaces. I work in government, and they can be a bit funny about uCrew because it is considered a social networking site, so that could be a problem too. Yeah, there's lots of various issues.
Yeah, so thank you for sharing that, David, and Michael and others. I hope that we can resolve that issue quickly. But I'm just going to share the screen now so at least you get to look at what uCrew is all about, even if you can't access it. And I'll show you at least a couple of ways that I access uCrew. If you have different ways of doing it, let me know. I'll share the screen now. All right, so again, you should be seeing the Moodle site for this subject. You'll see the link to uCrew. If you click on that link, it will then take you through to the landing page for uCrew for statutory interpretation. And 3 hours ago, we heard from Gary. Before that, Catherine 4 hours ago. And you can see that you can raise issues, you can ask questions, you can provide commentary. If you want to, you can ask me, you can ask a question directly of me, but my preference is always to keep the questions, the comments open so that we can all participate. And the other good thing that I've found over the years is that students help each other very well using UCrew. And I thank all of you in the past that have done that, and I trust that you'll do that again in future. If we go back to the My CQU page, mine will be different to yours being staff, but you will see here at the bottom left-hand corner a direct link to UCrew. So if I click on that button, that will take me through to my general UCrew page rather than specifically for the page for this subject. And you'll see that the various subjects that I have some involvement in are listed there. So I go to the UCrew for the particular subject. So they're the two ways that I access UCrew. And for those of you that haven't seen it before, that's what it's all about. Does anyone else have any other ways of accessing UCrew? All right. We'll try to
look.
Yes, Sarah?
Yeah, there's an app for Apple devices, although mine doesn't work. I haven't figured out why yet. But you can also directly access UCrew through like searching the UCrew website and then clicking, it'll take you to the CQU University login page, the CQU University UCrew.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. And when I had an iPhone last year, I also had that app. I went to Windows Phone. Not sure why I did that, but there's no app for Windows phones. No app for Windows phones for a lot of things. I hope I don't get sued for that comment. I'm just whispering it so nobody hears it. All right, so thank you. If you do have problems, please continue to ask. Michael will try to sort those things out. Likewise for Deb and Stella, and we'll get there. All right, so back to the landing page, the Moodle page for this subject. Again, I'll share the screen. Moving down the page, we have a link to News Forum, which is really where I provide some announcements. I don't use that an awful lot. We have the timetable for this term. I'm sure you've all seen that Word document. That is reflected in the headings for each week. So week 1, introduction, refreshing your research skills, 6th of November. That's always the Monday of the week that we refer to. Those headings and the dates are reflected in that timetable, which is a Word document, as well as some commentary about when the assessments are due. Speaking of which, we have the assessments here, a link to each of the assessments under this latest information heading, if you like, and also the same links over here in the assessment block. Now let's have a look at these assessments. The first one is a research task. Sorry, the first one is a research task. It's due on the 14th of December this year, which is week 5. The assessments that I set follow a familiar pattern, and that is that I ask you to submit your work by Thursday evening at 11:45 p.m. I will always have, apart from one exception, and that is Introduction to Law first assessment, I'll always have a cut-off, which is the Saturday week, 9 days after the assessment is due. If you don't submit on time, you will lose 5% per day. So if you're late by a day or two, don't stress, you'll only lose 5 or 10%. So still put in your work, but do so as quickly as you can. If, however, you don't submit by the cut-off date, then you will receive no marks. You can apply for an extension, but given that I'm now specifically addressing the assessment and providing you direct information about the assessment, it will be very difficult for you to successfully apply for an extension because something happened on the 13th and the 14th of December. Because you might expect that the response will be, you've had since the 8th of November in order to get that work done. You shouldn't necessarily have left it till the last minute because things do go wrong, don't they? So if you want to apply for an extension, please do so. I encourage you to do so, but you will need to support your application with corroborative material, and you'll need to have some good reason as to why you didn't complete the task at an earlier stage if your application for an extension is based on something that's happened at the last minute. Don't worry, I'm probably not as tough as I'm making out. But the point is that you are all being trained as if you are going to practice in law. And if you have a commitment to a court or a client on the 14th or by the 14th of December, for example, then the court will not particularly be interested in the fact that you got tied up in work at some other project on the 12th and 13th of December. They still expect you to stand in front of them and present your material on the 14th of December. So it's the same for me. Are there any questions about extension applications? Are we all good? All right, good. And presumably you know how to apply for an extension. It's not an email to me saying, please give me an extension. You've got to apply through the formal channels in Moodle. Make sure you upload. If you are applying for an extension, you must do so before the due date. I won't accept an application for an extension if it's after the due date. Oh, I'm tough, sorry. But it's all good training. I'll share the screen again. Let's have a look at this first assessment in a little bit more detail. I suspect that you've all looked at this already. So you've got a maximum word count of 2,000 words. I'm not particularly tough on the word count. I am on when you submit your work. But if you feel the need to go beyond the word count by maybe 10%, then feel free to do so. But bear in mind this, if you go beyond the word count, I will ask myself whether you wrote efficiently and whether the extra words that you felt you needed were wisely spent and necessary. You can consult with others about this work. So please don't be afraid to talk to your colleagues about any of the assessment work that at least I said. I put that under the heading of collaboration as opposed to collusion. And one of my overtly stated objectives in teaching this course is to encourage collaboration. And that means collaboration for the assessment work as well. The work that you submit must be your own, but you can share ideas, you can discuss topics, you can even exchange materials, and all of that's fine, but you can't collude. You can't directly take someone else's material and call it your own in the same way that you can't do that through textbooks or cases or legislation. You must cite your references and you must acknowledge the source of your materials. Do we have a reasonable understanding of at least what I've perceived to be collaboration, which is good and to be encouraged, and collusion, which is bad? Again, those that have worked with me in the past probably have a better idea. But if you have any concerns, just raise it on UCrew. We'll have an open discussion about it. Okay, thanks. We'll just share the screen again. So consultation with peers is fine, but don't collude, don't cheat or plagiarise. There's some comments about the word count. AGLC, you must comply with the Australian Guide to Legal Citations in referencing your work. You must be able to use footnote referencing in your material. Now, the assessment task is pretty straightforward. Find some legislation. If you're in a different state to Queensland, use your own state material. That general philosophy applies to my assessment work as well. Where you can answer a question by reference to material that is relevant to you in your jurisdiction, please feel free to do so. You won't be penalised because you failed to answer the question from a Queensland perspective. But do me a favour and just make it clear at the heading of the note that you've answered this question from, let's say, the perspective of the jurisdiction of Victoria rather than Queensland. It'll make it very clear to me. So find some legislation, answers some basic questions about that legislation, and then write a case note. This is a really simple warm-up exercise for statutory interpretation, and one that I expect that you'll be able to do well. Does everyone have a good idea of how to research legal matters and to reference legal material? Those of you that are just starting in the law may have some concerns. Those that are studying from outside the law school may have concerns. Does anyone have any issues? All right, so we're all pretty good in this group, this cohort that's joined me now on legal research. We're all okay?
John, just
Yes,
a quick
sorry.
question with regards to legislation for this.
Yes.
It's state only. We can't use Commonwealth.
No, you can use Commonwealth. Oh, did I say state?
Yes.
I did. Look, I've got to be careful about this. I really don't mind if it's Commonwealth as well. So was there some particular Commonwealth legislation that you had in mind, Sarah, or are you just asking generally?
I had already gone through and picked out a piece of, well, actually I had better ask if the numbered regulations were also included in that.
Regulations, do you mean, or legislation?
Yeah. So well, it comes under legislation. They're called, hang on, I've got to figure out where I was. The numbered, hang on, Western Australian.
Look,
okay, found it.
okay.
Like they would come under the numbered acts or numbered regulations for either the Commonwealth or the state.
Yep. I mean, just
so they're
yeah,
fine.
That's fine. Yep. Look, that's fine. I'll just stop you there. If even though the question says legislation or your home state, if you choose to go Commonwealth, that'll be fine. My main purpose is to have you think about the legislation. I'm not really concerned where you source the legislation. So if you want to go Commonwealth, that's fine as well. You know, I shouldn't do this. I'll have to whisper again so nobody hears me. But it's a university policy. Once you set the assessment piece, you shouldn't be making changes on the run. So I'm just going to be a little bit flexible there and maybe just announce that you intend to use some Commonwealth legislation at the heading. But I certainly won't mark you down. So that'd be good. I want it to be relevant for you as well. Okay, so a couple of people while we've been chatting have said, look, I might need some help with referencing. I might need some help with referencing, not so much legal research, but referencing. We have some people that have done Introduction to Law with me. I know that some of the people can reference very well. Let's invite you to look at the material on Moodle first up if you're having concerns about referencing material. Have a look at the Australian Guide to Legal Citations. Have a look at some of the commentaries about the Australian Guide to Legal Citations that provide some shorthand notes about what to do. At the back of the AGLC, there's a short reference guide, isn't there? Isn't there a summary sheet at the back of AGLC? Yep, that's a really good place to look at.
The Deakin Guide to the Deakin Guide is a summary that's really good as well.
Yep, the Deakin Guide. Thank you. Nicole says, here's a good start from the CQU library. Great. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, David. I wonder if Cite This For Me was another comment made by Lisa about something that she came across through another student last year. Can I ask a favour? And Jess says, I prefer Deakin AGLC. The UQ have a very good one as well. Could I ask a favour? Could those of you who have access to that material share it on UCrew and lend a hand? So if somebody's struggling, I'm sure that myself and others will be able to help you through that. All right, so Stella says, I haven't previous experience with legal research. What do you recommend? Well, again, it's hard. It's a bit hard when you're dealing with people that have had a lot of work with legal research. In Introduction to Law last year, it was 1 week supposedly, but I think we spent about 4 weeks on legal research. So if you're struggling, have a look at some excellent recordings. We might be able to share some of those for you and ask questions. I've created some links already on Moodle. Let me share and I'll see if I can find those links. I'll just close the assessment that I had up on the screen. I may have already, no, I've still got Moodle up on screen. So just allow me to share the screen once again. And I'm conscious that we're moving through the time, but thank you. I appreciate this. All right, so under latest information, we have additional resources. Under additional resources, we have the CQ Law Library Research Guide. Have a look at that. Useful web links will probably be helpful. You should certainly look at not so much Survive Law website, but I do want you to have a look at the Commonwealth Parliament website about the creation of legislation. The Parliamentary Education Office has some really good basic information. Have a look at the Legislation Register for the Commonwealth. Have a look at Queensland legislation, which is run through the Office of Parliamentary Counsel, but it's Legislation Queensland. Ostley is great. Barnett Jade is great as well, and some of the court's websites. So that's some place to start your legal research. And so follow those links. There's some good material there in relation to AGLC as well. Accessing legislation and case law there's some further information there. That's a bit dated. ComLaw's no longer the one that we use. I'll need to update that material. All right, I know that's vague answer to the question for those that want to know where to start looking for legal research.
John, I just posted a link to the Deakin Guide PDF on UCrew now.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. Terrific. Appreciate that. And Nicole, that link that you've provided in the chat facility, would you be kind enough to provide that through UCrew as well? If you did,
I think
terrific.
I think I should also let everyone know that's going to look at the Deakin Guide. It is an abridged version of the bigger AG, but it is something that a lot of people use a lot easier than the full guide, which I also have. But I've used the Deakin with more success, really. Yep,
the full AGLC is quite a document. That's why I was sort of thinking of the last page as the guide to it as well. All right, so those that need some help, a bit of a leg up, your fellow students, I'm sure, will be able to help you. All right, now the second assessment piece, you need to start thinking about now as well. I'm going to just share the screen. I know this is pretty basic, but it's important because I want you to start thinking backwards. I want you to start thinking about how you're going to complete these tasks and when, and what resources you need. So again, this is week 8. You've got 2 questions to answer. You need to prepare a document that will help you to solve statutory interpretation, and the second is to actually solve a statutory interpretation problem. Again, there are word limits. There is the same guidelines, and what I want you to do is prepare something that you can actually use in practice for yourself. So there's a flow chart which may be useful in terms of an interpretation process. But everyone's a bit different, and those of you that have done Introduction to Law will be familiar with the toolkit, which is designed generally to assist you in legal thinking and problem solving. So the idea of the first part of the second assessment is to encourage you to do something similar but tailored specifically to statutory interpretation. And the second part is just a really simple little hypothetical, of course, scenario where, based purely on statutory interpretation grounds, you are to consider purpose, intention, and other interpretive techniques to help Mary to defend a prosecution. So be aware of those assessments, know when they're due, know what's in the assessment. So as you're reading and you think of something that might help you in answering that assessment, jot it down. So please don't start thinking about the assessment in the week that it's due. Look at it now, identify the key points, have a good idea of what you need to fill the space, and then as you read, as you hear things, you can then, as you think of ideas, you can start to fill that space. So it's a far less daunting task than it would be if you started from scratch late in the piece. All right, does anyone have any tips or hints on exam and assessment technique they wish to share? Yes, Sarah?
John, just one quick thing. Did you want me to add my note to UCRU about legislation for assessment 1, like what we can use and what we can't use?
Actually, that'd be good. That'd be terrific. Thank you. And that way, it's all there publicly available. So I'd appreciate that.
That way, if I've got anything wrong, you can add a note on there.
Okay. Good.
Also, the problem about Mary with regards to the second assessment, you will upload that at a later date because it doesn't seem to be on the assessment page at the moment.
So I've already told, maybe it was my intention not to disclose it at this stage. I thought I had, but I will upload it I will make sure that's uploaded.
Yeah, I don't mind if it was later. I just thought, I hope you haven't realised it was gone.
Yeah, no, I want it to be now, so I'm not sure why I didn't upload it. So upload number 2, I will do that hopefully this evening.
There isn't a separate document for the first assessment. The details are just on the assessment page as well for us on Moodle.
Look, last term I had some problems that I hadn't encountered before last unit, and that was to do with uploading documents through my SharePoint facility using Office 365. The system just didn't like when I would upload or refer to a document within the context of an assessment piece. So let me just have a look at this. Let me share the screen again. I think this is my version of a workaround for that problem. So I'm going back to the Moodle site, and we got as far as additional resources, and then I stopped. I should have gone a bit further down the page to look at assessment guides and assessment materials. So my guess is, under the heading of assessment #2 material, that we actually have the assessment. I'll just open it. And there it is. So that is the assessment piece. So typically in the past, I would have put a copy of that document or a link to that document within the assessment. Because of the SharePoint problems, there it is. So I have uploaded it, it's just it's hiding. So just to confirm where that is, under assessment guides, assessment materials, we have Word versions of the 2 assessments. They're there at this stage. All right. What I should probably do is upload that to Moodle as well, to UCRU as well. Yeah, sorry.
Can I ask a question about assessment 3?
Yes. Oh, yes. I'm glad you said that. Yep.
I noticed, unlike my other law exams and other colleagues who've already or have done statutory interpretation, it's going to be run through ProctorU as a 3-hour exam instead of the normal take-home paper over a couple of days.
Yep.
In regards to that, obviously with the other law take-home papers, especially with yourself, John, you're very much into presentation and obviously undoubtedly referencing and sources. How much is that going to sort of change within a 3-hour exam as opposed to the way people have done that in the past in regards to presentation, sources, referencing, and as you can imagine,
Yes, that's a really good question. So for those of you that have read the assessment pieces, you would have noticed that assessment 3 is in fact an online exam using ProctorU, and it's a case of good news and bad news. It will occur on Monday the 5th of February 2018. Now, it's a hybrid situation, and you are part of the class that is trialling this. So I think I was the first one to trial UCrew, and now I've been called upon to be the first one to trial ProctorU, and I enjoyed trying to master these technologies. ProctorU is basically, is anyone familiar with it? Has anyone been involved in ProctorU? Okay. We're dealing with some people in the United States. I've had some Zoom sessions with people in California and I think Atlanta, Georgia. Essentially what it is an international platform where a person takes the place of the invigilator in an invigilated examination, but does so in an online context. I'll provide you with more details and some links. I think Swinburne might be using this technique as well. So you'll actually have a person you deal with, and you will need to be at your computer, of course. You will need to satisfy the examiner about your materials. I'm going to make it easy. It's really an open book exam, so it'll be quite simple to do. But you get a start time, a stop time you've got to submit in a formal manner, and it's a way of allowing you to have a proper examination context as if you're in an invigilated examination, but you're at home or at work or wherever you might be on your own computer. Now, to answer your question, David, 3 hours, you're just not going to have the opportunity to reference your material or present it in the same way that you would if you had a day or two to do that. So I will make due allowance for that. I still expect you to reference your work in the sense of acknowledging the source. I mean, we all know that if you're typing something and you've sourced something out of, say, that textbook, it only takes a minute to hit the insert footnote button and then type statutory interpretation in Australia. That's not going to take you too long, or just a shorthand version of that. So I'd prefer you went footnote referencing for the Word version that you prepared during the examination, but you don't have to, and don't worry about full citations. You won't have to do a bibliography. You don't have to do all those sorts of trim extras. But just if you do draw your material from somewhere, a case or legislation, or a secondary material like a textbook, just acknowledge it. Does that answer your question, David?
It does. I'm just also wondering, and I can see someone else asked a similar, what I'm about to ask as well, which is it going to be sort of one exercise as one question that we have to answer, or is it going to be a series or a mixture of questions?
Yeah, sure. Look, it will be a series of questions. It won't just be one long answer question. There won't be, it's not multiple choice, but will there be multiple choice components? Yeah, typically there would be, but I'll give you more hints about the content of the exam as we go.
I hope that the IT technology works on the day for us guinea pigs.
Yeah. Well, so embrace the fact that you are the guinea pigs, because if there is something that goes wrong, then we'll just have to fix it. But we'll make due allowance for that. Yes, Michael?
Question 2, assessment 2 with Mary. Is that an Iraq process?
Look, you can never really go too far wrong with Iraq process. Yeah. That's always a good way to move. Okay, now with the exam, Nicole says, are we all doing this at the same time, 5 o'clock? That was my brief, if you like. What I wanted to do was say everyone starts at 5 p.m, everyone finishes at 8 p.m. That's probably not going to be possible. In order to have the number of proctors that we need, we will probably have to have some windows. So we haven't worked out the final detail yet, but it may be that you start your examination, you book in your time. You may start your exam at, say, 4 p.m. and finish at 7, or you may start your exam at 6 p.m. and finish at 9. So it's approximately 5 till 8, but there will be some flexibility. Lisa says childcare doesn't open that late if 3 hours starts at. Yep, sorry, we're going to have to make some plans. I guess the good news is that you know about the date, and the approximate time at least a long way out. Sorry. But bear in mind, it is better than having to travel 2 hours to get to an exam venue, try and get some parking, wait around and do it at a particular time. So hopefully that's the compromise. Michael, did you have a question? Or Lisa, did you have a question? No? Okay.
No.
Yes, Michael?
No, all good.
All good? All right. Thank you. So that's the examination regime. We'll talk more about that in detail as we proceed. We've talked a little bit about statutory interpretation tonight. I trust that you've all read chapter 1 of your textbook, which is excellent. I encourage you to answer the weekly problems. Who knows? That might give you a good start to your examination if you answer the weekly problems. Make sure that you upload your answers. That way you can claim ownership to the responses that you give. And if anybody else likes your answers, in an exam context, they're going to have to cite you as their reference source, aren't they? So get your answers in as quickly as possible each week. Now, Kerry says, will someone be able to post info about Iraq on UCrew? You've never used that before. Again, I'm very conscious of the fact that we have people that are joining us from having previously studied Introduction to Law to those that are currently doing it. So if you're currently doing Introduction to Law, you've got me for that. So I'll try and cater for you in both those subjects. But there's a lot of good information about Iraq. Have a look at the new lawyer, and I forget the chapter and the page, but there's a lot of good material there. So we'll try and cater. If you have questions, ask through UCrew, and I'm sure that you'll get some good material by way of response. Okay.
John?
All right. Yes, Sarah?
Just quickly before we move on, with regards to the first assessment for formatting wise, are we just any way we like it, Q&A style, or because I was reading through it and I'm like, well, the first section, it doesn't, like, there's a little bit of writing through the end bits, but the first 2 bits, I'm like, well, this is just a link. I don't know what.
Yeah.
If that was, yeah.
Look, I'm really just interested to ensure that you have some good information about the legislation, but Q&A style is fine. So provided it's presented in a professional manner, I'm not too concerned about the format in this sense. That's a guarded response. Again, if you've worked with me in the past, you'll have a better idea of what I'm after. I'm really fussy when it comes to spelling, consistency of format. It's got to look professional. When you've got time to present it, then present it professionally. But if you choose to present it in a particular manner as opposed to some other manner, then that's fine. So if you want to go Q&A style, that's fine, provided it's professional looking in the overall sense. Hope that answers your question, Sarah. Okay. Michael?
Someone's just asked about Iraq process on UCrew. If someone here, I can't access UCrew, but if someone here can access contract A, there's a document they've got in there on Iraq process in your extra information where all your referencing and everything is. And it's someone can upload that for everyone else. That'll be helpful. I just can't do it for them.
That would be excellent. All right. Thanks, Michael. You will be able to soon, I'm sure. Thank you. All right, well, time's up. Thank you very much for your patience. You've been really patient tonight. We've worked through a fair bit of material. We've got a lot to cover this term. But we'll wrap it up now and we will see you next week. Okay, all the best. Bye then.